spokesperson here today. Miigwech to Skyler, and we'll give you the mic.
You know, coming here today, we thought about, and I've been asked a bunch of times, why are you participating in a system that is not ours? And you know, it was a question that I had a lot of thought about, because all of this happy Indian rhetoric that we keep hearing from Justin Trudeau and politicians across the country about what this looks like for reconciliation, for truth, for reconciliation. And I said, well, you know what, we're participating in this court proceeding today because we want to be able to give them an opportunity to show some real change, to see whether or not that is something that they're willing to do. Whether or not they are willing to look at themselves long enough and hard enough to say that the reason that I live in my house every day, the reason that I go to work and pay my taxes every day is because of the deaths of millions of these Indigenous people that lived on this continent before we arrived. That the genocide that was committed against our people is something that we can't just let that slide. You know, and we want to be able to give these opportunities to these settler folks in these courtrooms and in these government offices, that opportunity to say that we understand what your people have gone through. We have now learned what your people have gone through in order to be here. And so when we are able to make these stands, because you know what, we've seen over and over and over again what these courts do and what these cops do and to answer to these injunctions. Because the only thing that these injunctions do and are only utilized almost like 90% of the time is against Indigenous folks across these lands. And so when they utilize these tools to continue that violence, to continue to perpetuate that genocide that was committed against our people, that is being committed against our people on our lands. Because you see, we don't want anything more than every big city, every small town that has grown and grown and grown across this country. We want to be able to have that same opportunity to grow our borders. Because you see, we don't live like our Western brothers and sisters. We don't cover everything in concrete and asphalt and call that progress. No, we live in a way that leaves place for the deer, the raccoons, the foxes, the eagles, the hawks. Like, those are important parts of who we are, so we need to have them around us. And so when we cover everything in concrete and asphalt, we build these high rises so that we can live like that's not how we live at Six Nations. And so when these big companies come in and try and do exactly this on our unceded lands, you know what? For our grandchildren that we borrow these lands from. Because you see, that's the teachings that we get, is that these lands that we're on, this life that we're given, like, this is borrowed from those future generations. And so when we have these big companies coming in and wanting to do all of this horrible nonsense to our lands, it is like, who am I and who are you to say that to those next generations that they aren't allowed to have this? They aren't allowed to have the beauty that once was our Grand River. You know that, and you know, I just got back from BC, a week ago. And you know what, the first day that I was there, I went down to the river, or Wedzingwa, and put my hands in a river and took a drink from it. That was the first time that I'd ever done that in my life. And it immediately brought me back to, you know, my homelands on the Grand River, on the not so sandy shores of the Grand River, and thought whether or not I could put my hands in there and what that would look like, what that would feel like for me to take that drink 200-300 years ago. And like that, it brought a tear to my eye, thinking about what that would look like to say to my great-great-grandkids that, you know, we didn't stand up for it. We didn't make the stands that we're making today. And so to be here in front of this courtroom today, to give this opportunity for these settler folks that have benefited greatly from the trauma of my community, from my nation, to be able to say to them, you know what, you have a chance now to reconcile for a lot of those hurts. And I don't think that making a win here today is going to change anything, because it won't. You know, like these changes, that these little bits of fight, they are incremental wins. The developer pulling out at 1492 Landback Lane, like that was a win, absolutely. And those little wins, they need to be celebrated. Gunestado in 2006, you know, Oka, like these are wins that we got, but they are incremental. This fight is a generational fight. The reason that we're able to make this fight today is because the men and women of our community made those stands, as my father did, as my grandfather and my grandmother did. That is the reason that we're able to make these fights today. And you know, the fact that I'm the only one named in this, you know what, the fact that I'm the only person named in this injunction and been called the leader by these courts and by the cops and everybody else, like, is an absolutely ridiculous statement. You know, the women of our community, the clan mothers and the women of our community that we hold in such high regard, that hold the highest level of office in our government structure at Six Nations. Like, these are the people that have pushed us along, have guided the path. And so, you know, we are guided by those ancestors, but you know what, today, in everything that we do, we find that strength in our women. And this idea that I'm paraded around in these courtrooms and by these cops as being the radical leader of anything, I'm going to tell you, the women of our community, the women of Six Nations, like, if you think I'm bad, you know, don't piss them off.